So, I just got back from watching Pete's Dragon, the remake of the 1977 classic of the same name, and I have to say, it's good. It's okay, it didn't impress me, but it was pretty good. Now, this story is a little bit different than the one that was presented back in 1977, where in the past it was on the coastline, it was in Passamaquoddy. This time it's in a lumber mill town in some northwestern state, and it's pretty much paint by numbers if you're talking about movies that have to involve a boy and his dog. And that's kind of what this movie is. There's parts of this movie where it is a boy and his dog type story, but there's some things about this movie that I find a little bit interesting. For one thing, what I think has been constant throughout the both iterations is how I do believe that Elliot as a dragon is a metaphor for childhood and certain aspects of childhood that that people have to grow up into or without. But that's just my opinion. Now let's get into some technicals here. So the acting in this movie. What I want to say about the previous incarnation of this story is, for as much love as I give Pete's Dragon, there's parts of the acting in the original Pete's Dragon where I find it's a bit over the top, especially with the villains and some of the main cast. However, this new one, there is still some of the over the top stuff, like with Karl Urban's character, who is a villain. It's a little bit over the top for his character, but the rest of them act pretty normal. And that's just what I think, really, about these new characters, about the new Pete's Dragon, essentially, is that the acting is a little bit better than the original. The writing for this movie isn't as strong, though. There's parts of the story where I think it improves upon the original. Like there's parts of the story where it puts background and some sort of backstory to the dragon himself, Elliot. And I think with the backstory it allows people to actually get a sense of where the dragon goes from, because in the original, again, as much as I really love the original, there isn't much of a backstory for that character. Is it a necessary backstory? I don't think it is. I don't think it's a necessary backstory, because the original, it didn't really need to be explained where he comes from. And in the new one, they don't really give a specific, but they kind of give you some sort of mythological folklore that allows people to get a little bit more connected to Elliot. And I think that's a good strong point. Okay, so let's talk about the good versus the bad. Let's start with the good. The good, again, acting. The writing is a little better. The orchestral songs were pretty great. The visuals were great. And, compared to the Jungle Book, who had really photorealistic type animals in its film, this one doesn't have photorealism. It doesn't have this photorealistic thing. It goes for a more cartoony look, kind of like in the original, but it's more along the lines of, oh yeah, this is a real-looking dragon. And that's what it is. And the one thing I could say is that the animators did a really good job at pulling the emotions for this character, who otherwise just would be a robot on the screen. The one thing I could say that I wish could have happened with Elliot is that at certain times I wish they would have some sort of animatronic, so that it could provide a little bit more realism for the character, to pull it into a little bit more reality. But as far as Elliot goes, he's pretty good. He's depicted pretty well, although not as memorable as the original. It still kind of improves upon some things I had troubles with in the original. Now let's get into the bad. The villain of this movie is pretty one-note. You could already tell by a mile away that he's going to be the villain, and you already know what his motivation is. And in some cases it's not that bad, but in this one it's the same sort of stereotype we kind of know from these types of stories. But, and that's played by Karl Urban. And as much as I like Karl, he doesn't really bring a lot of memorability to his character. Not like the villains in the original, because the original had, very zany and original, very funny villains. This one kind of is not really memorable, unfortunately. In the beginning, there's a lot of this, on-the-nose type stuff. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to go on an adventure. And he goes on an adventure, and 6 years later, he gets discovered and whatnot. He still goes on this adventure, really. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Some of the songs have the Randy Newman syndrome, where it's, it'll sing a song, and it tells you how you're supposed to feel, or what the characters are feeling at that moment. It's kind of dumb. It's kind of dumb how some of the lyrical songs do that. The song Go North is actually the best song in the film. The rest of them are just it's just too on the nose. There's parts of this film where it's just too on the nose that I almost felt it was getting too self-aware as a film. But yeah, that's pretty much my only complaints about the film. It kind of went a little bit too fast, so I wish it could have just kind of slowed it down and built upon more of the character of Pete, because he's been gone for 6 years, according to the film's lore. So I wish it could have done something with that. And then speaking of Pete, he's pretty good in this film. He's a little bit more... He's better than the original. He's just a little bit better than the original. Because in the original, he's like, oh, I'm going to go to town. And, you would think that a person running from foster care wouldn't want to go into town that would notice him and say, oh, well, he looks like he's a stray. Can we help him? This version of Pete makes sense. It makes a little bit more sense than the original, I feel at least. But overall, I think this film is pretty fun. Is it as good as the original? No, but it has some slight improvements from the original that make it worthwhile watching. I did enjoy watching this film. There was nothing that really made me want to watch it again, because I feel like I've seen it all before. Would I buy it on DVD or Blu-ray? Possibly, just to do a comparative analysis of both the original and the new one. But overall, if you want to go see this movie, go see it with your family. That's fine. That's okay. That's good. This is a good movie to take your friends and family out. Don't watch it multiple times, but just watch it once. You'll probably get it all in one take. But I'd say I'm giving this film a 7 out of 10. This is a pretty good, decent movie that is pretty good, and that's what I think about this movie. It's a 7 out of 10. I wasn't blown away, but my expectations were met. It's just one of those movies that kind of just meets my expectations, but doesn't really surpass it. So, until next time at the movies, peace.